Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, Arizona is seeing the nation's largest increase in Latino early voting. Also tonight we'll talk about the legal rights of employees to take time off to vote, and we'll hear about a program promoting citizen scientists. Those stories next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. Democratic Vice Presidential candidate Tim Kaine was in town today, a campaign swing that included a speech delivered entirely in Spanish in front of an audience at the Maryvale Community Center. Kaine developed his Spanish as a missionary in Honduras. Kaine's visit comes as Democrats are hoping to rally the vote, particularly among Hispanics in Arizona. Tomorrow, Donald Trump Jr. will be back in town, joining Utah Senator Orrin Hatch to campaign for Donald Trump Sr. As noted, Arizona's Hispanic vote is showing the nation's largest surge in early Latino voting. As of October 30th, Latinos represent 13% of early voters in the state. Here to talk about the Hispanic vote and its possible impact is Joe Garcia, director of the Latino Policy Center at ASU's Morrison Institute for Public Policy. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us. The Hispanic vote in Arizona, how significant is it going to be Tuesday?
Well, that's the question that's asked at every election cycle. And every election, it seems like there's a little bit of disappointment afterwards. But the numbers are going up. And with every new election, there are more Latinos who are of voting age, eligible to vote, registering to vote, and perhaps voting. But of course, voting is the second part of that that's so key. It's not just the registration, but it's getting out to vote.
So, in the grand scheme of things, how much of a difference will the Hispanic vote make on Tuesday, do you think?
Well, it depends. The polls are all over the place. They have them as high as, some polls as 35 percentage points of Latinos going for Hillary Clinton. Our poll has it much more closer at 6.5 percentage points ahead. But then if you even drill down a little further, it gets 10% when people are leaning that way. So it depends on the turnout. But I do think that there is going to be an impact from Latino voters this time like never before, but it's not going to be the political landscape changing Arizona from a red state, conservative, to blue, progressive state that everyone's thinking about, but there will be a wave of impact.
So as far as voter registration, what are we seeing so far?
Well, you're seeing the uptick again on Latino voters, but you're going to see that continually through 2030 because it's just right now that Latinos are still a young population and many of them aren't old enough to vote. But let me give you something to think about. Every month for the next 2 decades, 50,000 Latinos in the United States are going to be turning 18 years old. And here in Maricopa County, we looked at the numbers, it's 2,042 Latinos will be turning 18 and eligible to vote every month for the next 20 years. So it's a young population coming up every month eligible to vote.
Does that mean for those who expect some sort of significant sea change Tuesday, you're just simply not going to see it? You may not see it in 2018, you may not see it in 2020, but you might see it thereafter.
Yeah, but this election is a little bit different too because it's a combo factor. There is an anti-Trump message out there as well. With many Republicans not voting for their nominee, that combo with a more energized Latino electorate can make a difference in offices. It just won't change the state and the underground political landscape.
What about the Arpaio candidacy?
Well, that goes hand in hand with the Trump candidacy. They're handcuffed, and there's no pun intended on that one, as far as who you're going to vote for. If you're anti-Trump, you're probably anti-Arpaio, and if you're pro-Trump, you're probably pro-Arpaio. And many of that immigration issues, those two are just tied together.
Out of curiosity, for those Latinos who are pro-Trump and or pro-Arpaio, what reasons do they give?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. But first of all, you have to know that Latinos match very nicely with the Republican core values of family and faith, patriotism, military service, small business entrepreneurship. It's immigration, which is usually the deal breaker, because for the Latino community, it's more than political rhetoric or policy. It's reality where a friend or relative or neighbor or coworker can be deported. So it's a real thing in the Latino community. And if the rhetoric is too harsh, and it does reach a level, perhaps, it comes across as anti-Latino and not necessarily anti-immigration.
Do you see much in the way of Latino voters who at least respond to the surveys and the polls who say that they can stomach the immigration because Democrats are too liberal on some of those core values?
Well, no, because again, it's a
It's just-
personal.
it's
It's
so
a personal.
personal,
It's
yeah.
a deal breaker for many Latinos, and if Republicans ever decide to drop the immigration hardcore line, many Latinos would go to the Republican Party. I have no doubt on that. But for Latinos, that may not be a bad thing if they're represented at the table of both Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Latino issues are heard in both political parties.
You know, you mentioned earlier on that I think the first thing you mentioned was that we keep hearing about this. Every election, we keep hearing that this is going to happen and this is going to be a change. And yet, Latinos still don't vote as often as expected. Why?
Well, I think part of it is it's tied to, it's an institutionalized thing. It's also a very personal thing where it's the same as education. If your parents don't go to college, you're likely not to go to college. And it's the same if your parents don't vote, you're likely not to vote. It's just not part of your DNA. It's not part of your family situation. You don't talk about it at the dinner table. It's just not part of a regular thing you do. So that's why it's so important, I think, for many people, is that Latinos vote at this millennial generation. Younger people vote now, because if they vote now, they're going to be voting for all their entire lifetime. If they don't vote now, they kind of get lost in that, and then they don't vote.
And we should mention so many young Latino voters are still too young to vote.
Correct.
And even if they are young enough, old enough to vote, young folks in general don't vote regardless of your ethnicity. They just simply don't vote as much as older folks.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge too, is if you look at the people who don't vote, it's young people don't vote, poor people don't vote, and undereducated people don't vote, people without college degrees or a certificate. And we're talking about Latinos, there's an educational attainment gap with Latinos here in Arizona. Disproportionate number of people live in poverty who are Latino, and the young population is Latino. The median age is 25, whereas for non-Latino whites, it's 44. So it's a young population, but those three buckets, regardless of ethnicity, to get them to vote is a real challenge.
Yeah, and I guess for some folks it's even difficult to leave to work to go vote, correct?
Absolutely, and if you're far away, let's say you're a roofer, my father was a roofer, and you're 35, 40 miles away from your voting place, you're not gonna get back in time to vote. So that's why there's been a big push for this early voting, vote by mail. You're not hassled at the ballot box, you're not tied to the voting times, you do it at your own time. So this is the move that's made, and you can see the uptick in the number of voting. But that's for all of Arizona. I mean, look at it. They say, what, a third of the ballots have already been cast?
Yes, which is interesting considering these late charges and counter charges and the whole 9 yards. Regarding the pace of change, and we talked about it, it may take decades for what some see as a sea change from red to blue, and you're saying that if the Republicans drop the immigration gambit, you may not even see that because so many Latinos would either go Republican or stay Republican. Is the candidacy of Trump, quickening that change?
Perhaps. I mean, that's what we're going to wait to see. But voting behaviors are set before we even vote. And at a young age, we start kind of understanding how we're going to go. So understand that kids today that cannot vote are already taking in this information and may choose to vote. And voting behavior right now for Latinos, even if you're an independent, it's largely Democratic. And if you're Democratic, of course, it's largely Democratic. So there is some challenges there for the Republican Party, but it's still there.
So let's say the polls and the odds are not in favor of Donald Trump right now. Who knows what happens Tuesday? But right now, he's not leading in many of the polls and many of the scenarios. Let's say he wins. How does that impact the Latino vote in Arizona? Is that a rallying cry? Is that a throw up your hands, but there's nothing we can do? What do you think?
Well, I think it would be a rallying cry. I think there has been a rallying cry anyway when one of the nominees is saying that Mexicans are killers and criminals and rapists and build the wall and deport them all. And this kind of harsh rhetoric already is galvanizing the Latino community in a way that I've never seen before. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So, it depends on how it's going to go. But, Latinos are energized like I haven't seen, and we're going to see how that goes.
And conversely, if Clinton wins, will there be an expectation? You said this, you said X, Y, and Z. Let's see it.
Yeah, there was the expectation after Barack Obama won office because there was the two houses that were Democrats. And people thought that he was going to go for comprehensive immigration reform, and he went for the health care reform and kind of put immigration reform on the back burner. So there is some doubt on what's going to happen. And promises are easy in campaign, more difficult to execute.
Looking forward to Tuesday?
Oh yeah, aren't you?
Looking forward to Wednesday?
That's right.
Probably even more so. Joe, good to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Ted.
Get the inside scoop on what's happening at Arizona PBS. Become an insider. You'll receive weekly updates on the most anticipated upcoming programs and events. Get the insider delivered to your email inbox. Visit azpbs.org to sign up today.
Question: do employees have a legal right to receive time off to leave work and go to the polls to vote? For the answer, we welcome John Velitis, an attorney with Fenimore Craig. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Ted.
Thanks for joining us. Give me the answer there. If I'm an employee and I want to go vote, can I say, boss, I'm going to go vote?
Well, you may, as long as you do it at least the day before the election. You have to give notice of your desire, your intent to do that. And that occurs under our voting rights statute, which we've had on the books here in Arizona for quite some time. And basically the law provides that all workers have a right to 3 consecutive hours within which to vote without any reduction in compensation. And the question that this law typically raises is, depending on when the worker starts in the morning or gets off in the afternoon, are there 3 hours before or after the worker starts his or her shift? So if the polls are open, say, from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., and a worker typically starts his or her shift at 9 in the morning, that person has 3 hours, consecutive hours within which to vote. That employer in that scenario wouldn't have to afford that individual any additional time. But if the worker works 8 to 5, and the polls are 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., well, we only have 2 consecutive hours before or after that workday, and that employer would have to give that worker 1 hour of paid time off either at the beginning or the end of the day to make up the 3 consecutive hours.
Does the worker have to give some kind of written request?
No, the statute doesn't provide for what type of notice the worker gives. It just makes clear that the worker has to give notice at least 1 day in advance. So they could do it now, but they could do it as late as Monday before the election on Tuesday.
And the employee must be eligible to vote, I would imagine.
Well, has to be eligible, has to be registered. His or her voting rights must not have been suspended somehow. So all those criteria must be met in order for the worker to take advantage of the statute. Right.
So the worker comes traipsing into the boss's office and says, I'm going to go vote, I'm off for the next 3 hours, and you find out that he's not registered. You got something against the guy, correct?
Oh, well, perfectly good reason for discipline in that situation. Yeah.
Okay, otherwise though, you can't just say, I really don't want you to take any time off today. That worker, he or she, they get a legal right to those 3 hours.
Yes, they have it. And if the statute provides that if an employer doesn't comply, theoretically, it's subject to prosecution for a Class 2 misdemeanor, which is punishable by whatever fines and imprisonment. I'm not aware of any situations in which that's occurred, but the law has that, you could call it an incentive for employers to comply in it. That would be the enforcement mechanism in the law.
Does the employee have to prove that they voted?
No, the statute doesn't address that, but, and this question I think comes up periodically. I think if the employer developed a suspicion, though, that the worker wasn't using the time responsibly for, the purpose it's intended to be used for, the employer certainly would be within its rights to ask and maybe even insist that the worker provide some evidence of voting. I mean, the statute is designed to give us rights, not to allow people to exploit some additional time off.
Well, with that idea, let's say the polling place is right across the street from where you work.
Right.
It takes you 20 minutes maybe to get through the whole ballot. You still get 3 hours?
That's not the way I read the statute. The statute says that the worker is entitled to 3 consecutive hours for the purpose of voting, not for the purpose of casting a vote and then going grocery shopping or going to Starbucks. Right. So I don't think that would probably happen.
So what are the most common conflicts with this scenario? Or do you see much in the way of conflicts here? Are employers pretty open about letting people off to go vote?
I think the conflict arises because the law is one that is infrequently used or thought about. We're not having elections every month, and so this issue comes up only infrequently.
Yeah.
And a lot of employers don't know about it. Similarly, a lot of employees don't know that they have the right to exercise, but I think there are a lot of employers that have no idea that they have to give this time off if it's requested and if the 3 consecutive hour window isn't present. So the conflict really arises, I think, out of employers and employees' failure to actually know about the law.
Has these conflicts, have they eased over the years? I mean, how long has the law been in place?
Long time.
Long time,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Have the conflicts themselves, have we seen fewer of these over the years?
Yes, but I don't know that it's necessarily because of the fact that employers or workers are better educated. I think a lot of it has to do with the prevalence and popularity of early voting and mail-in ballots.
Yeah.
Because now this law really is a law that's designed to really protect the rights of people who still enjoy the process, the ritual of going to a poll and casting a vote. And you know, Arizona, I think, is one of the leaders in terms of the popularity of mail-in ballots. And so this law, I think, is becoming less and less significant just because of voting trends.
So keep in mind, 3 consecutive hours for the purpose of voting.
Correct.
All right. We'll see what happens on Tuesday. Good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ted.
Tonight's edition of Arizona Technology and Innovation looks at a program that aims to help citizens gather and take part in scientific research. Here to talk about his Citizen Scientist program is Mike Alandi, an assistant professor of manufacturing engineering at ASU's Ira A. Fulton Schools of Engineering. Welcome to Arizona Horizon.
Thank you.
Good to have you. Citizen Science. What are we talking about here?
Well, so Citizen Science is a community of people who approach scientific discovery and exploration from a point of view of being part of a larger community, collecting data, and sharing that broadly with scientific investigators. Citizen scientists don't necessarily need to have a credential to be able to do some of the work that they do.
Are we talking about amateur shade tree scientists here?
Well, so it ranges the gamut. It's mostly people who are hobbyists or volunteers that get involved in one aspect of a citizen science project. They're usually interested in their local community, interested in the environment, or figuring out more about what's going on, and then leverage that interest to explore something that they're curious about.
So your program now takes these folks and does what?
Well, so I work with a colleague of mine, Darlene Cavalier, who runs a website called SciStarter, which is a research affiliate of Arizona State University, and it's an online repository of about 1,500 citizen science projects. We're leveraging that community and that resource and trying to figure out how to engage citizen scientists in projects that may require specialized tools to do some of the exploration and data collection.
I know I read that gathering information, learning how to solve problems in general. What kind of problems are we talking about here?
Well, so there's an example citizen science project that we're trying to prototype a kit of tools to help people engage in this in their community. NASA has a program called GLOBE that is trying to engage everyday people in science and education. One of their projects is to try to study the effect of El Nino. And in order to ground truth the data that gets collected from the satellites and whatnot, they're engaging people in protocols to investigate moisture, water, and the like. And so we're working with, partnering with local libraries around Phoenix, some other partners in North Carolina and Texas to try to put together a box of materials that one can go to their local library, check out, and do data collection and investigation for about 6 weeks to collect this data.
That seems so interesting, especially if you're trying to gather rainfall amounts and these sorts of things. But to make you have to make sure these folks know what they're doing. Are they trained in any way? Do they have to pass any kind of requirement or those sorts of things?
Well, so it's an interesting balance of trying to leverage an individual's motivation and curiosity around their local environment, and to provide them with the right set of protocols or instructions to be able to collect data that is useful to the project organizers for the citizen science projects. So we're starting to prototype these kits that already have sets of instruments that are at the right level of refinement for the purposes of those projects.
And I guess that one of the requirements would be understanding how to work the kit. I mean, you got to.
Right, and so we're trying to figure out balance how much training is needed versus how much instructions might there be to collect the requisite data.
Do you recruit these citizen scientists? Do you find which ones might be best suited for this, that, or the other?
Well, so it's a large community of people who are interested in citizen science, and we approach it as if it's something that you're interested in, then we can figure out how to make it work for you. So there's there's a very wide range of types of projects, and maybe even the complexity of it and what kinds of instruments and tools you might need. And so there's lots of opportunities for people to get involved in citizen science type projects. We're trying to take the more involved projects that required specialized equipment because there's concern over the quality of the data that's required. So we have, for example, a rain gauge that measures to the 1/10 of an inch rather than what you might commonly find in your backyard weather station.
Right. I had to go to Home Depot or something like that and pull one of those.
Right.
The Citizen Science Maker Summit, what is that?
So last week at Arizona State, we hosted a group of about 75 people for the Citizen Science Maker Summit, and it was a group of thought leaders that came from the citizen science community, from the making community, and anywhere in between. It's practitioners, academics, people in industry or in government agencies. And so we had 2 days of wonderful conversation about what can citizen scientists and makers learn from each other. Both of them are very much rooted in communities of practice. So we shared best practices. We shared inspiring stories of people who are doing these activities out in the community. We shared any number of innovative tools that people are developing to help make this happen.
What got you started in this? What was the impetus behind all this?
Well, so I think of myself as a maker, and I think of making as citizen engineering. So what are the problems that I care about? How can I apply my engineering know-how to solve those problems? In parallel, citizen scientists are curious about things and want to tackle projects where they could satisfy their curiosity. To me, there's an interesting overlap of citizen science and making, and particularly when it comes to talking about instruments and trying to make low-cost instruments to help make these citizen science projects possible. To me, tinkering with technology to try to figure out how to make a better sensor, a better tool, is really kind of exciting. For me, I get excited about technical and non-technical people trying to tackle problems that they care about.
So if we have some technical and some non-technical people that are watching right now and saying, I've been working on this thing in my garage, or I've been sitting here thinking that there's some sort of project out there, I'd like to see this fly. How do they become a citizen scientist?
Well, so I would point them first to scistarter.org.
How do you spell that?
SCISTARTER.
Okay.
And then the Globe El Nino project that I talked about, globescistarter.org. There's also ways in which at Arizona State we're engaging citizen scientists and makers. So we have summer programs for middle school students and high school students. We have invention kind of experiences for people in the public. I would point them generally to make.asu.edu for more information and invite people to contact me who are interested.
All right, but that's scistarter.org. Sounds like a
Yes.
pretty good. Okay, good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Friday on Arizona Horizon, it's the Journalists Roundtable. We'll talk about all the attention Arizona is getting in the closing days of the presidential race, and we'll also look at what the state's early voting patterns might suggest for Tuesday's results. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thanks for joining us. You have a great evening.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.